In the final desperate months of World War II, Nazi Germany unleashed a revolutionary weapon that would change naval warfare forever. This is the story of the Type XXI U-boat, Hitler's secret submarine that was literally decades ahead of its time. Built in underground bunkers, powered by revolutionary technology, and designed to turn the tide of the war, this vessel represents one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the entire conflict. Today we're diving deep into the hidden history of the submarine that terrified the Allies and influenced naval design for the next 50 years. By 1943, Germany's U-boat campaign in the Atlantic was collapsing. Admiral Karl Dönitz's wolf packs, which had once terrorized Allied shipping, were now being hunted and destroyed at an alarming rate. In May 1943 alone, Germany lost 41 U-boats, an unsustainable catastrophe. The Allies had cracked the Enigma code, developed effective radar, and deployed long-range aircraft that could patrol the entire Atlantic. The old Type XXI U-boats, which had been the backbone of the Kriegsmarine, were now death traps. The conventional U-boats of the era were not true submarines. They were really surface ships that could dive temporarily. They spent most of their time on the surface, using diesel engines for travel and only submerging to attack or hide. Underwater they were slow, nearly blind, and could only remain submerged for a few hours before their batteries ran out. When Allied aircraft spotted them on the surface, they were sitting ducks. The Allied anti-submarine warfare became devastatingly effective. Destroyers with sonar could track U-boats underwater. Depth charges rained down on German submarines with deadly precision. Aircraft equipped with radar could spot a U-boat's periscope or conning tower from miles away. The hunters had become the hunted, and German submariners faced a horrifying 75% casualty rate, the highest of any branch in any military during the entire war. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, understood the crisis better than anyone. A veteran submariner from World War I, Dönitz had pioneered the wolfpack tactics that had nearly brought Britain to its knees in the early war years. But now he needed something revolutionary. He needed a true submarine, a vessel that could operate underwater indefinitely, travel faster submerged than on the surface, and strike without warning. In late 1943, Dönitz approached Hitler with a desperate proposal. He wanted to abandon the production of conventional U-boats entirely and focus all resources on a completely new design. This was an enormous gamble. It would mean temporarily halting U-boat production during the critical redesign phase, leaving the Atlantic more vulnerable. But Dönitz convinced Hitler that this revolutionary new submarine could win the Battle of the Atlantic and cut Britain's lifeline to America. The Type XXI represented a complete reimagining of submarine design. German engineers, led by Professor Helmut Walter and the design team at the Kriegsmarine, created something that wouldn't be matched until nuclear submarines appeared in the 1950s. Every aspect of the Type XXI was revolutionary, from its streamlined hull to its battery capacity to its weapon systems. The first revolutionary feature was the hull design. Traditional U-boats had a deck gun, railings, and various protrusions that created drag underwater. The Type XXI had a completely smooth, streamlined hull, the first true teardrop shape in submarine design. This design would become standard for all submarines built after the war. The hull was specifically optimized for underwater speed, not surface travel, a complete reversal of previous thinking. The battery capacity was tripled compared to Type 7 boats. The Type XXI carried massive banks of advanced batteries that could power the submarine for days underwater at low speed or provide bursts of high speed for attacks and escapes. For the first time, a submarine could patrol its hunting grounds entirely underwater, surfacing only occasionally to recharge batteries using a snorkel system. The snorkel, a Dutch invention the Germans captured and perfected, was integrated into the Type XXI design. This telescopic pipe allowed diesel engines to run while the submarine remained just below the surface, recharging batteries while staying nearly invisible to radar and aircraft. The submarine could breathe while submerged, dramatically extending its underwater endurance. The torpedo system was completely automated. Previous U-boats required the entire crew to manually load torpedoes, a process that took 20 minutes and was exhausting, dangerous work. The Type XXI had hydraulic loading systems that could reload all 6 forward torpedo tubes in just 12 minutes, operated by just 2 men. This meant the submarine could fire, reload, and fire again while remaining submerged and in contact with the target, a devastating tactical advantage. The passive sonar system was the most advanced in the world. The Type XXI could detect enemy ships from enormous distances without revealing its position. The submarine could track multiple targets simultaneously, calculate firing solutions, and launch attacks without ever using its periscope, making it nearly impossible to detect before it struck. The most shocking capability of the Type XXI was its underwater speed. Conventional U-boats could manage only 8 knots submerged for short periods. The Type XXI could reach 17.2 knots underwater, faster than most Allied destroyers could manage and faster than any convoy could travel. This meant the Type XXI could chase down targets, position itself for attack, and escape from enemy warships with ease. This speed advantage was a game-changer. Allied convoys typically travelled at 10 or 12 knots. The Type XXI could sprint ahead of a convoy, lie in wait, attack and then escape before escorts could respond. Even if detected, it could simply outrun pursuing destroyers underwater. No anti-submarine weapon system of the era could effectively counter this capability. The Type XXI could dive to depths of 280 meters, far deeper than Allied depth charges were typically set for. Combined with its speed and endurance, this made the submarine nearly impossible to sink. Allied anti-submarine tactics, which had been so effective against Type 7 boats, would be almost useless against the Type XXI. Building the Type XXI required completely revolutionizing submarine construction. Traditional U-boats were built in shipyards from the keel up a slow process taking 8-10 months per boat. Germany needed to produce Type XXIs faster than the Allies could sink them. The solution was modular construction, a technique that wouldn't become standard in shipbuilding for decades. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, implemented a revolutionary assembly line system. The Type XXI was divided into 8 massive prefabricated sections. These sections were built in factories across Germany, many of them underground, to protect from Allied bombing. The sections were then transported to shipyards, where they were welded together in just weeks, reducing construction time to an unprecedented 2-3 months. To protect production from Allied bombers, many Type line sections were built in massive underground factories. The Valentin submarine bunker in Bremen, still standing today, was one of the largest concrete structures ever built, designed to produce 1 Type XXI per month in complete safety from air attack. Thousands of forced laborers, including concentration camp prisoners, worked in horrific conditions to build these submarines. Moving the massive sections required special rail cars and careful coordination. Each section weighed dozens of tons and had to be transported through Allied bombing raids to reach assembly yards in Hamburg, Bremen, and other ports. The logistics were staggering, involving hundreds of factories, thousands of suppliers, and tens of thousands of workers. The final assembly was conducted at heavily fortified shipyards. Workers welded the 8 sections together, installed equipment, and conducted tests. The entire process, from the first cut of steel to a fully operational submarine, took just 176,000 man-hours, compared to 460,000 man-hours for a conventional U-boat. This industrialization of submarine production was unprecedented. By early 1944, production began in earnest. Germany planned to build 1,500 Type XXI submarines, enough to completely dominate the Atlantic and potentially force the Allies to negotiate peace. But time was running out. Allied armies were advancing from east and west. Allied bombers were pounding German industry day and night. The race was on to get the Type XXI operational before Germany collapsed. Allied intelligence learned about the Type XXI program in mid-1944 and immediately recognized the mortal threat that it represented. British intelligence assessments warned that if the Type XXI entered service in large numbers, it could revolutionize submarine warfare and potentially extend the war by years. Allied bombers targeted shipyards, factories, and transportation networks with renewed intensity. Despite the bombing, production accelerated. By November 1944, the first Type XXI was ready for sea trials. However, critical problems emerged. The rushed production and use of semi-skilled labor resulted in quality control issues. Welding was substandard, equipment malfunctioned, and critical systems failed during testing. Submarines had to return to shipyards for months of repairs and modifications. The training program was also inadequate. Type XXI crews needed specialized training to operate the revolutionary systems, but training facilities were being bombed, experienced instructors were scarce, and fuel for training exercises was almost non-existent. Many crews received only minimal training on the complex new systems before being declared operational. On April 30, 1945, the day Hitler committed suicide, U-2511, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Adalbert Schnee, departed from Bergen, Norway, on the first operational patrol of a Type XXI U-boat. After more than a year of development and countless setbacks, Hitler's wonder weapon was finally hunting in the Atlantic. But the war was already lost. On May 4, 1945, just 4 days before Germany's surrender, U-2511 encountered a British cruiser with destroyer escorts near the Hebrides. Schnee maneuvered his submarine into attack position, demonstrating the Type XXI's capabilities. He approached completely undetected, achieved a perfect firing solution, and could have sunk the cruiser with ease. But Schnee had received word that surrender negotiations were underway. He chose not to fire. After the war, Schnee reported his findings to Allied intelligence officers. He explained that the Type XXI had approached the British warships completely undetected, achieved firing position despite the presence of multiple escorts, and could have escaped without any possibility of counterattack. The British were stunned. Their most advanced anti-submarine systems had been completely useless against the Type XXI. This single patrol, even though no shots were fired, demonstrated what might have happened if the Type XXI had become operational 6 months earlier. Intelligence assessments concluded that if 100 Type XXI had been operational by late 1944, they could have sunk enough shipping to severely disrupt the Allied war effort and possibly prevent the D-Day invasion from being properly supplied. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, approximately 120 Type XXI submarines had been commissioned into the Kriegsmarine. However, only two had actually conducted war patrols, U-2511 and U-3008. Most were still working up crews undergoing repairs or trapped in ports by Allied advances. Dozens more were in various stages of construction. Many Type XXI commanders, upon receiving the surrender order, chose to scuttle their submarines rather than hand them over to the Allies. All across German-controlled waters, crews opened seacocks and sent their revolutionary boats to the bottom. They understood that these submarines represented years of advantage for whoever possessed them, and many preferred to destroy them rather than see them in enemy hands. The Allies captured numerous intact Type XXIs and immediately began studying them. The British, Americans, French, and Soviets all wanted these submarines. Under Operation Deadlight, many captured U-boats were deliberately sunk in the Atlantic, but the Type XXIs were too valuable to destroy. Each Allied navy fought for possession of these technological marvels. When American engineers first examined a Type XXI in detail, they were shocked. The submarine incorporated technologies the U.S. Navy had considered impossible or decades away. The battery capacity, hull design, automation systems, and underwater speed were all far beyond anything the Allies had developed. One U.S. Navy report stated bluntly, "This submarine is 20 years ahead of current American designs." The Soviet Union was particularly aggressive in claiming Type XXI submarines. Soviet forces captured several boats in German ports and shipped them back to Leningrad for study. Soviet engineers dismantled them completely, photographed every component, and used the designs to revolutionize their own submarine program. The entire Soviet submarine fleet for the next 15 years was based on Type XXI technology. The British took several Type XXIs for extensive testing. The Royal Navy conducted trials that confirmed everything the Germans had claimed. In exercises against British anti-submarine forces, the Type XXI proved nearly impossible to detect or counter. British destroyers, frigates and aircraft, the best anti-submarine systems in the world, were completely outmatched. The French Navy also claimed Type XXI submarines and used them as the basis for their post-war submarine program. Even though France had not developed advanced submarines during the war, they now possessed world-leading submarine technology, simply by studying the captured German boats. The U.S. Navy immediately launched the Guppy program, Greater Underwater Propulsion Power Program, to modernize American submarines based on Type XXI technology. Dozens of American fleet submarines were cut apart and rebuilt with streamlined hulls, increased battery capacity, and snorkels, all copying the Type XXI design. These Guppy submarines served effectively into the 1970s. American submarine designers admitted that every submarine built in the United States after 1945 incorporated Type XXI innovations. The famous Tang-class submarines of the 1950s were basically American versions of the Type XXI, scaled up and improved. The teardrop hull shape, pioneered by the Type XXI, became standard for all submarines, diesel or nuclear. When the U.S. Navy developed the first nuclear submarines in the 1950s, they used the Type XXI hull shape and design philosophy. Admiral Hyman Rickover, father of the nuclear submarine, studied the Type XXI carefully and incorporated its underwater optimization into the USS Nautilus and subsequent nuclear boats. The Type XXI proved that submarines should be designed for underwater performance, first a principle that guides submarine design to this day. Even modern conventional submarines built in Germany, Sweden, Japan and other countries can trace their design lineage directly back to the Type XXI. The concept of a true submarine, optimized for underwater operations rather than surface travel, began with this revolutionary German design. The Soviet Union's Whiskey-class submarine, which became the backbone of the Soviet submarine fleet through the Cold War, was essentially a copy of the Type XXI. Soviet engineers took the captured German boats, made minor modifications, and put them into mass production. Over 230 Whiskey-class submarines were built between 1949 and 1957, the most numerous class of submarines ever built. These Soviet submarines, based on Type WWII technology, posed a serious threat to NATO throughout the early Cold War. They were quiet, fast underwater, and difficult to detect. Western navies had to develop entirely new anti-submarine warfare techniques and technologies to counter them, and they were really countering German technology from World War II. The irony was profound. The Type XXI, which Germany built too late to affect World War II, became one of the most influential weapons of the Cold War. Through the Whiskey-class and other derivatives, Type XXI technology threatened Western shipping lanes and naval forces for decades after Nazi Germany ceased to exist. Let's examine the technical specifications that made the Type XXI so revolutionary. The submarine was 76.7 meters long, with a displacement of 1,621 tons surfaced and 1,819 tons submerged. This was larger than previous U-boats, providing space for the massive battery banks and additional equipment. The power plant consisted of two supercharged E-man diesels generating 4,000 horsepower for surface running and battery charging, and two electric motors producing 4,200 horsepower for submerged operations. This was more than double the electrical power of previous U-boats, enabling the revolutionary underwater speed of 17.2 knots. The battery capacity was 62 tons of advanced lead-acid batteries, 3 times the capacity of Type 7 boats. This enabled submerged cruising for 2-3 days at low speed or 1 hour at full speed. The schnorkel allowed battery recharging while remaining at periscope depth, virtually invisible to radar. Armament consisted of 6 bow torpedo tubes, with 23 torpedoes carried enough for multiple attacks without returning to base. The hydraulic loading system could reload all 6 tubes in 12 minutes. There was no deck gun, no external armament. Everything was optimized for underwater warfare. The crew complement was 57 men, including 5 officers. Despite being larger than previous U-boats, the Type XXI required a smaller crew due to automation and improved systems design. Living conditions were significantly better than previous boats, with real bunks for all crew members and improved sanitation. Military historians have endlessly debated the what-if scenario. What if the Type XXI had become operational 6 months earlier? What if 50 or 100 of these submarines had been hunting in the Atlantic during the D-Day invasion? The potential consequences were staggering to consider. Allied intelligence assessments conducted after the war concluded that a fleet of Type XXI submarines could have devastated Allied shipping. The submarines were essentially undetectable and unsinkable with current technology. Allied convoys would have been massacred, and the massive build-up of supplies needed for D-Day might have been impossible. Some historians argue that Type XX submarines could have extended the war by a year or more. Others suggest they might have forced the Allies to negotiate a conditional surrender rather than demanding unconditional capitulation. The strategic impact of true submarine superiority cannot be overstated. However, other historians point out that the Type XXI suffered from serious quality control issues due to rushed production. Many boats experienced mechanical failures, system malfunctions, and structural problems. The German training program was inadequate, and fuel shortages would have limited operations. Perhaps the Type XXI wouldn't have been as decisive as feared. The reality is that Germany lost the production race. Even with revolutionary technology, they couldn't build enough Type XXIs fast enough to change the outcome. The industrial might of the United States, combined with Allied air superiority and code breaking, had already sealed Germany's fate. The Type XXI was a brilliant design that came too late. Several Type XXI submarines had extensive post-war careers, serving in Allied navies for decades. The French Navy commissioned several boats, using them for training and development through the 1960s. Soviet boats served even longer, with some Whiskey-class submarines remaining active into the 1980s. The American Navy used captured Type XXIs primarily for testing and evaluation rather than active service. However, the knowledge gained from these submarines transformed American submarine design for generations. Every principle learned from the Type XXI was incorporated into U.S. submarines. One Type XXI, U-2540, later renamed Wilhelm Bauer, was raised from Flensburg Harbor in 1957 and restored to operational condition. This submarine served in the new West German Navy and is now a museum ship preserved in Bremerhaven. It remains the only Type XXI that can be visited and examined in detail today. Another boat, U-3008, was taken by the US Navy and used for extensive testing before being deliberately sunk in torpedo trials. The British operated several Type XXIs for years before eventually scrapping them. Each Allied power gained invaluable knowledge from these revolutionary submarines. The Type XXI's legacy extends far beyond its brief operational service. This submarine established the template for all modern submarines. The principles it pioneered, underwater optimization, streamlined hulls, large battery capacity, advanced sonar, and weapon automation, remain standard features of submarines built 80 years later. Modern conventional submarines built in Germany, Sweden, Japan, France, and other countries are direct descendants of the Type XXI. The German Type 212 and Type 214 submarines, among the most advanced diesel-electric boats in the world, can trace their design lineage back to the Type XXI. The same hull optimization, the same emphasis on quiet underwater operations, the same focus on electrical power and battery capacity. Even nuclear submarines owe a debt to the Type XXI. When nuclear power replaced diesel-electric systems in the 1950s, designers kept the Type XXI's hull shape and underwater optimization philosophy. The revolutionary idea that submarines should be designed primarily for underwater performance rather than surface capability originated with the Type XXI. The Type XXI also demonstrated the potential of modular construction and prefabrication in shipbuilding. Though initially implemented to speed German production under wartime pressure, these techniques proved valuable in peacetime. Modern shipyards worldwide use prefabrication and modular assembly methods pioneered in the Type XXI program. The Type XXI U-boat stands as one of the most remarkable weapon systems of World War II, not for what it accomplished during the war, but for its lasting impact on naval warfare. This submarine represented a quantum leap in technology, a revolutionary design that redefined what a submarine could be. Adolf Hitler called the Type 20 U-Boat his miracle weapon that would turn the tide of war. Like most of Hitler's miracle weapons, it came too late and in too few numbers to affect the outcome. But unlike the V-2 rockets, jet fighters and other late-war German innovations, the Type XXI actually was revolutionary enough to potentially change the war's course if deployed earlier. The submarine story illustrates both the potential and the limits of technology in warfare. Germany possessed superior submarine technology, but lacked the industrial capacity, resources, and time to deploy it effectively. The Allies' advantages in production, intelligence, and resources proved more decisive than German technical innovation. Today, the Type XXI serves as a reminder of how warfare evolves and how revolutionary technologies can emerge from desperate circumstances. The submarine that never fought a real battle became one of the most influential weapon systems of the 20th century, shaping submarine design and naval warfare for generations. When you look at any modern submarine, German, American, Russian, French, British, Japanese, you're looking at a vessel whose fundamental design philosophy can be traced back to a revolutionary German submarine built in the final desperate months of World War II. The Type XXI U-boat truly was 20 years ahead of its time, and its influence continues to shape naval warfare more than 80 years after it first slipped beneath the waves.